Hello and welcome to a conversation with the Middle East Monitor. My name is Nassim Ahmed and I will be your host for today's conversation with MEMO. The themes of exile, displacement, resistance to Israeli occupation and identity is deeply intertwined with the Palestinian story. Palestinians in their various ways experience these powerful emotions. Today we will be talking to Amira Al-Shanti, a Scottish-Palestinian actor, singer and writer, about the way she navigates her Palestinian identity. Amira's recent work, which we'll be watching today, is a 12-minute film, Set the Dove to the Olive Tree, a love letter to Palestine. Welcome to the show, Amira.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we dive into our conversation, I want to mention some of the things you have accomplished so far. I mean, you've made your West End debut in the world premiere of Rumi at the London Coliseum. You've also made a number of previous other, theatre appearances as well and publications. Your most recent work has been published in issues 2 and 3 of Dardishi, and previous writing has been published by the Herald, which was your letter to JK Rowling, which we'll also discuss today. You've accomplished a lot, and we don't, and I don't want to mention every single thing you've achieved so far, which is quite amazing. Before we dive into our conversation, though, I would like to give our audiences, the opportunity to watch your most recent 12-minute video, Set the Dove to the Olive Tree, a love letter to Palestine, which will be the topic of our conversation today. So let us all watch this 12-minute video together, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
يبدأ من لما تكون طفل بدك تروح على المدرسة.
قصة هي قصيرة لكن مؤثرة.
طبعا نحن كفلسطينيين نعيش تحت الاحتلال.
53 children killed in the aftermath of Israeli operations. Israeli and 7 children used as human shields by Israel.
Sometimes I feel so alone. The whole world has turned its back on my people. Children are being ripped from their homes. Soldiers attack innocent worshippers as they pray. And no one is doing anything, whilst my people on the other side of the world are being targeted because their blood, like mine, is Palestinian. Well-intentioned people call it a war, a conflict. They say it's too complicated. I'm exhausted trying to tell them it's not. I know I am lucky to be safe here in Scotland. Lucky to have been born and raised in a place where I don't live in fear of my house being bombed or denied my basic human rights under an apartheid regime, but I'm lost. I'm forbidden to even enter my homeland and physically be with my people in their struggle. I'm trying to do everything I can, but how much change can one person really make? When a child cries, they cry for their mother. She alone can bring them comfort. In me. My mother, Palestine. In me, Palestine. I always feel closest to you in nature. The music of the river, the rustle of the leaves. You taught me that we're all born from the soil and we're destined to return to it. My friends here, the apple and bramble trees, send their love to their cousins, the grapevines and Jaffa orange trees. As always, I miss your olive trees the most. I will never forget your golden sunlight spilling over green, calling me back to you across 4,000 miles. Like a dove to the olive tree. I see a lot of you here. The lush Scottish glens and emerald hues of the Jordan Valley are not so different. The green rolling hills and deep valleys mirror your name. Palestine. But in Scotland, we can roam our land freely, whilst you're burned down, carved up, and walled in. The West Bank is surrounded by a wall, with over 600 checkpoints, in an area smaller than Perthshire, stopping people from going to school, work, or prayers. And to avoid an unpayable fine or an 18-month prison sentence, families in Jerusalem are being forced to demolish their own homes to make way for a theme park. Palestinians living in Israel are stripped from their identity, called Arabs, not Palestinians, to justify a state only created in 1948. And people here in the Western world only care about Gaza when the bombs are falling. Yet people there are living without basic sanitation, medical supplies, and drinking water every single day. We're complaining about local lockdowns when Gaza has been locked down for over a decade. But there are people here who care. People who are learning, listening, and more are starting to speak up. Edinburgh stands a key at its church doors, big enough for the diaspora of 7 million displaced all over the world. We are ready and waiting to come home to you and restore the world's promise to us. Haq il-Audi. Dundee has adopted Nablus as its twin. Standing here on Nablus Avenue is the closest my feet will get to your ground. And Glasgow remembers Deir Yassin, where 107 Palestinians were killed by Zionist militia in 1948 to create the country of Israel. It is the only place of mourning the Palestinians in Scotland have, as the ethnic cleansing of their people continues to this day, 73 years later. But there's still so much to be done, and so much the media propaganda makes unclear. Anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism. We just want equality, peace, and basic human rights for everyone. Do you hear the jangle of your children's keys? Keys held so tight for decades. Their shapes imprinted on their palms. Your kidnappers say the old will die and the young will forget. They turn their back on you, try to erase us from maps and history books. They try to get others to turn away too, so that your child is left as an orphan. And yet, Handala still persists. 10 years old, barefoot, and tough. His artist Najil Ali died on the 29th of August, 1987. He was assassinated in London for inciting hope. He was only one person. but he affected millions. He promised that as the world turned its back on Palestinian children, Hamdallah too would turn his back, only to show his face when the world recognizes Palestinian children's rights. Immi, I know you. As we, your children, are caged up, longing for freedom, we also feel our mother's chains with every butchered olive tree, every death of our siblings, every senseless response from a world that celebrates Christmas but stays silent when Bethlehem is blasted by bullets. But your lullaby always reaches my ears, carried by the birds, singing Samud, filling my heart with the brightest light. You remind me that I'm not alone. You remind me that to exist is to resist. In the taupes we embroider and wear, in the olives we harvest and press into oil, bitter and thick like juice. In the cack we bake and knead with our hands. In the duck we pulse through our legs and stamp into the earth. Your strength gives me strength. That steadfast determination to survive through everyday Nakba. We are stronger together when we base our love and hope in pursuing justice and truth. I am Palestinian and Scottish. These two passionate identities together are an unstoppable force, driven by love for both people and both countries. Immi, you are my healer, my mother. No matter how hard the world and thieves try, they cannot break the bond or lineage between mother and child. I am you, and you are me, and you are more than what they want you to be, said the dove to the olive tree. Just as you never turn your back on us, your children will never turn their back on you. For change to happen, we all need to act. Don't turn your back any longer.
Welcome back. It's a powerful video, I would say, Amira, is the very highest quality. But the most amazing thing for me is a spoken word that's been used throughout the film. anyone versed in books on Palestinian history will be familiar with some of the words and phrases, but never in the form that's given, you've given, you know, so much life and meaning in the way you've done. So tell us a bit about the background to this production, the idea, and what is the love letter that you've written, and what is the dove saying to the olive tree?
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you to my amazing team who made it such a high quality video and supported the development of the spoken word. The background of the project essentially comes from during lockdown. My friend had set up a play reading group for actors to just kind of keep their skills up throughout a time where there wasn't much work going on. And that coincided with the time of sort of mainstream society becoming more aware of the Black Lives Matter movement. And during that time, we had a great discussion playgroup just about the way the industry is and the representation or lack of representation of global majority voices. And from that, a conversation was had about myself and my heritage, being Palestinian, being in the industry and not really feeling like there were any projects that represented me as a Palestinian and the kind of beliefs that I had. And from that, my friend Rachel said, actually, you know, why don't we make something that represents your views and represents your voice? And that's how we started the project, and Rachel became the producer and sort of script supervisor for me, along with Ryan Dewar, who filmed and directed the piece, and Gordon Robertson, who developed the sort of music behind it as well. So it was a small, intimate team, but it just meant that we got to keep the kind of message of the film alive. And essentially, it was just kind of to try and reflect how it feels to be a member of the Palestinian diaspora, kind of internationally, sort of waiting to go back home, growing up with stories about Palestine, but sort of experiencing real difficulty in being able to go to the country where I'm from. And
which part of Palestine are you originally from?
I'm a mixture, so I have family from Jaffa, I have family from Kilkelia, and I have family from Jerusalem as well. So a bit of everything, mostly. And yeah, I guess essentially the dove is kind of depicting that kind of message, kind of going back to the motherland, saying that I will return, you know, winter will be over and I'll be able to come back and live kind of spring eternally there.
And how many times have you tried to return to Palestine, even for a visit?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very limited. I was lucky to go a couple of times, but it's not really happened since then. I think I've just been very vocal in my views, and as a result, it's going to be tricky if I go back. So I'm hoping that, God willing, one day I will be able to go.
One day, inshallah. Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the Black Lives Matter moment 2-3 years ago. I think a lot of people made the connection between the occupation of Palestine and how Palestinians suffer under, occupation, and also the experience of Black people in the US. I think it was a powerful moment for a lot of Palestinians. Was that also a moment where you kind of found or reaffirmed your Palestinian identity? Did you feel empowered to say something and get what was inside you out into the world through a 12-minute video such as that? Yeah,
I think I'm someone that has spoken up about sort of anti-racism work since quite a young age, and it's sort of being in Scotland in a white majority kind of population, that sort of topic is not always well received. So it's been really challenging to kind of, you know, affirm who I am, assert who I am, but also feel settled in a society that might actually embody some of the values that I had. So when BLM sort of started to be a topic of discussion amongst that kind of society, I certainly felt just really excited and really empowered that actually change might be happening. People are starting to think a bit more about issues of race. And when BLM was happening, absolutely, it was, I think I speak for a lot of people who are from the global majority, that it was an exciting time, but also incredibly triggering and tiring. But I tried to focus on it being about sort of Black perspectives, because that's, you know, a topic that we should all sort of prioritize. But alongside that, when the parallels were kind of made between sort of the experience of Palestinians and the experience of sort of, you know, Black people in America, for example, it was sort of an opportunity to just kind of say, actually, you know, this is the case. You know, you've got pictures of George Floyd sort of circulating, and then you've got pictures of Palestinians in that same position. I think it's important to not sort of compare the two, because obviously there are very distinct factors that make them very different experiences. But I think from that, and from kind of seeing what people were kind of engaging with those discussions, it made me feel like there was a bit of promise that people might consider Palestine a bit more, consider Palestinians a bit more. And it certainly did. It was the catalyst to making this film. But I think sort of growing up the whole time with that kind of battle inside of me, there was always going to be something that I would create. So I was just really fortunate that the stars aligned, so to speak.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, talking of the video itself, I mean, you speak about your own guilt of living in relative safety in Scotland, while your family unable to return, while you see your fellow Palestinians living under Israeli occupation. Speak a little bit about that identity and how you manage to reconcile. I mean, a lot of people growing up in the West, I mean, as Muslims in the West myself, there's no one single moment where you find yourself being able to reconcile your Britishness, your Muslimness, your Bengaliness in my case. It's actually it's a long journey, where as a diaspora community where you are happy living in the country you're kind of born in, or, you know, grew up in. And you find that balance somehow over a long period and long journey. It's not one single moment. So in your case, dealing with the fact that you are living in relative safety and your country is under occupation, in brutal military occupation. So how is that journey for you personally? Has that been a long one? Was there a moment where you thought, okay, I'm content, happy with myself being Scottish, in your case, Scottish and Palestinian?
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey that's lifelong. It's something that's, you know, it's never still. It fluctuates, and there are moments where a part of myself will feel more affinity with Palestine, or a part of myself will feel more affinity with Scotland, for example. I think at the heart of it, you know, Palestine will always remain sort of the number one in my eyes. That's how I identify. But, you know, kind of growing up here, being born here, I'm so passionate about, you know, the country and the society that have, you know, kind of adopted me and fostered me and helped me become the person I am. So it really is a dual process. I think the hardest thing to battle with is, you know, coming across people that have no idea what Palestine is, or maybe have the wrong idea of what Palestine is or what Palestinians are. That can be really frustrating and really difficult to manage, because quite often I'm then taking the role of the educator, or someone that has to kind of, you know, put together a different perspective, and that can be challenging. But I think ultimately it's that survivor's guilt that makes it really, really difficult to kind of manage. You know, particularly in times of crisis, whenever Ramadan comes up and there's another attack on worshippers at Al-Aqsa, or bombing in Gaza, you know, that just kind of then gets triggered even more. I kind of feel it every day anyway, when I have the freedom to be able to, you know, go to work without a checkpoint or get running water. You know, these are kind of everyday things that we take for granted that a lot of Palestinians don't have access to. But then when the violence escalates, it then kind of brings it to the forefront even more. And I think that's where it becomes really challenging. I remember one of the attacks on Gaza a few years ago. There was a journalist that was live streaming events in the local area the whole time, and I ended up kind of just logging into that live stream and having it on whilst I was doing my day, all day for about a week, just so that I could feel something. I could feel, you know, what what my people are going through when I have the privilege of the fact that my family fled and I don't have, you know, the same kind of the same sort of experiences happening. And, you know, it was really traumatic in itself almost, but it's just kind of, you know, searching for some sort of way to experience what I should have experienced had my family not left, if that makes sense. And that's something that I think a lot of Palestinians in the diaspora grapple with. And it's also that sense of powerlessness. What can you do? What sort of changes can happen? And I guess for me, you know, in the process of writing the piece of Said the Dove to the Olive Tree, it helped me realize that actually it's the hope at the heart of every Palestinian that keeps us alive. And that's something that unites us as a nation, that we all believe that there will come a point when Palestine will be liberated and we will be able to go home. And, you know, working on projects like this just helps me cope with that kind of guilt and with that struggle a little bit, because it reaffirms everything that drives our survival, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned it in the video itself. If you're going to have this journey outside in any country, Scotland is probably one of the best places to have this journey, and not in France or even the US or other parts of Europe. Because as you mentioned, there's a strong affinity between Scotland and Palestine. There are several towns which have twinned themselves to Palestinian cities, yes. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, where there are various monuments and memorials, even for the Nakba and also the massacre at Deir Yassin and things like that. So tell us a bit about that part of Scottish history. How is it that Scotland is so connected? We know about the Irish history and their connection with Palestine, but not many people knew that Scotland also has a similar affinity with Palestine, unlike, say, other parts of other European countries, even the UK, I would say. I mean, of England, I would say, not UK.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, as a country, Scotland is quite progressive. It kind of prides itself as kind of welcoming everybody in, no matter where you're from or who you are. And it's a place where people are genuinely, you know, feel quite accepted and celebrated, especially in places like Glasgow and Dundee and Edinburgh, where, you know, there's a bit more sort of a diverse population. And there have been strong kind of movements here in solidarity with Palestine. There are different societies that then kind of drive, you know, those kind of links. So you've got, you know, Glasgow's twinned with Bethlehem, Dundee's twinned with Nablus. So these kind of twinnings really help kind of those connections a bit more. And certainly, you know, we've got things like Nablus Avenue, which is a street in Dundee. So it kind of shows that there are, you know, specific monuments dedicated to Palestine here, which kind of makes, you know, Palestinians feel welcome. It makes Palestinians feel like, okay, I'm in a country that recognizes what I go through is tragic and what my people are going through is tragic. So it creates that connectedness a little bit more. And I think in terms of the film, thematically, I wanted to put across that Palestine isn't, you know, a barren desert land, which was developed only when, you know, sort of Israel was established, but actually it is a place that's called Land of the Fertile in Arabic. So, you know, there are beautiful forests and mountains and beaches and things that maybe the West don't really consider. And actually there are a lot of parallels between here and there, because Scotland is really fertile as well in its own way. And that was kind of created through Rachel and I reflecting on the fact that sometimes when I drive through Scotland, I feel like I'm in Palestine, just with the valleys and the sort of greenery and things, the landscape. So we really wanted to hone in on that and sort of that kind of, when you're battling through that kind of survivor's guilt, when you're so frustrated that you feel like nobody's listening, you need to take that relaxation. You need to go home into that place of safety. And, you know, so often our busy kind of everyday lives, modern day lives now, when we need a break, we go to nature, don't we? We go back to Mother Nature. So I wanted to put that across, that, you know, sometimes all I need to do is drive a couple of hours to the Highlands and feel more connected to Palestine, because I'm in a landscape that's similar to it. And I think that's kind of the heart of it, is that actually the countries are very, very similar. And then you've also got the population, the community of Scotland. You know, there's that kind of saying that, you know, you get to know someone at a bus stop in Glasgow, for example, you get to know their whole life story. And that's so accurate. People in Scotland are very welcoming. They'll make sure that you've got something to eat, you've had a cup of tea, and that's very similar to Palestinian kind of culture, where I think there's a saying that we don't ask someone's name until they've stayed over at our house for 3 days before we then say, you know, who are you, get to know you a bit more. So that kind of welcoming factor between the two kind of shared kind of concepts it just reinforces the fact that we have a lot more in common than people think, and I think that's so important.
That's a really positive view to take, and I know it's really great you're able to have that kind of experience in Scotland. One of the things I mentioned that was really powerful about the video are the you know, the lines and the poems which you eloquently you know, recite. One of the thing which came to my mind was a saying from David Ben Gurion, which is in your poem, where he said, you know, about the Palestinians, that the old will die and the young will forget. And here you are, Palestine is Scotland, who has not forgotten about her homeland. And if anything, Palestine is really core to your identity. So how does that make you feel that, you know, it was once prophesied by a president that you will forget, but no, you know, do you feel proud the fact that you've managed to give new life to the meaning of what Palestine means, and also the memory of the Palestinians? How does that make you feel that, you know, you are an embodiment to the fact that Palestine will never be forgotten as an issue?
Yes, absolutely. I think you know, a statement like that is a really foolish one to make, because if you think psychologically, when you tell someone you can't be who you are, what are they going to do? They're going to hold on to that and express it even louder. So it's almost like that was only driving the survival mentality of like, well, we're here and we're never going to forget. I think, you know, it's important to consider that we're not a homogenous population, and there will be Palestinians out there that maybe aren't as connected, but I was really lucky and fortunate that I had parents and a family around me that made sure I knew their story, made sure I knew and understood what was going on, and supported me in that kind of journey of self-discovery. And I think that we would be foolish to think that that's not a common experience that a lot of Palestinians have who are born abroad. We have that kind of soul seeking, that we don't really know who our mother is. We don't know who our parent is because we've never been there. We haven't connected. And that's something, you know, people are curious. We're inherently curious beings, and we're going to try to find out who we are, where we belong. And I think my experience is only just kind of similar to everybody else, and we all find different ways of connecting to Palestine, to understanding what it is to be a Palestinian. And I'm just really lucky that I've had the opportunities that I have had to foster my creative skills and to create something like Said the Dove.
Amazing. Just before we finish, I want to ask you one last question about your 2 letters to JK Rowling. Why did you feel so moved to write to she's one of your heroes, I presume, and you felt the need to write to her about her supporting a statement. Tell us about that, and why did you feel strongly that you wrote 2 letters to her?
Sure. So that was a few years ago, so you're testing my memory slightly. You know, growing up, when you hear that there is a group of people that don't agree with you, don't agree with your identity, don't agree with your existence, don't agree with you traveling back to where your mum and dad grew up or were born, a group of people that have killed people in your family, have imprisoned them, have tortured your relatives and your friends, you start to feel alone. And especially as a child, it's really difficult to kind of make sense of that. And I came across Harry Potter very early on in my life as a child at school, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with this idea that there was a secret world and that there was this fight for justice, there was a fight for good. And, you know, over time, I kind of ended up having this impression in my head that the Harry Potter universe was like Palestine, and that the fight for safety from the villain was like the fight for Palestinians towards liberation. And so that's why that story meant so much to me. And you know, being a writer myself, I obviously was so captivated with the way that the world of Harry Potter was constructed, the characters, the context. It really inspired me, and that's where I wanted to become a writer, because I love the idea that you could pick up this book and then lose yourself in a world. So I'd always kind of been a really proud Harry Potter fan growing up, and yeah, a few years ago, found out that JK Rowling had signed a letter basically suggesting that BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions from Israel, was wrong, and that actually we should just sit down and have a conversation together, and that would fix everything. And to me, that's a really dismissive viewpoint to make, and it made me really angry. So my coping mechanism is to write. So I ended up writing just kind of a letter that I posted online, and I didn't even think that JK Rowling would ever read it. I just needed a way to kind of express my frustration that she had created something that was about justice. It was about for the greater good. And then to say something that, you know, if it was as simple as a discussion, let's all sit down and have a discussion. How many discussions have been had? Has anything changed? No. And then when you hear the oppressed, the people who are being occupied, the people who are suffering from an apartheid system saying, this is the only way forward. It's worked for South Africa, it can work for us. For someone completely random who's never had any link to that oppression to say, actually, your opinion is wrong, you should just be sitting down and behave and just talk to someone. It's very patronizing. And it's very dismissive. So I decided that I would, you know, talk about how ridiculous it was that we were then, you know, accepting this world that she created, but then she totally ignored the actual voice of a Palestinian who, you know, in similar ways were fighting for justice. So I wrote that, and then it sort of took off. I think a lot of the feedback I got was that it was really helpful. Like I sort of drew upon sort of parallels in the Harry Potter universe and then compared it to Palestine and the sort of Palestinian experience. And that a lot of people said that it made it really accessible as an issue to see, because they grew up with Harry Potter as well, but they didn't really understand Palestine. So it took off and it went sort of viral, and that's where the Herald came in and published it. JK Rowling then sent a response, and again I sort of found issues with that response, so I again wrote another response back, and that was then published again, and it was just basically debunking. I sort of found out a little bit about where this letter had come from and what led to her signing it and things, and that was kind of a story. So yeah, in a really weird way, I kind of grew up wishing that she would one day see something I wrote, and she did, but maybe it wasn't the kind of circumstances that I'd thought.
Yeah, I mean, when JK Rowling isn't alone in this. I mean, there is a phenomenon out there, which you probably heard of the term, you know, progressive except for Palestine. So a lot of people like JK Rowling, a lot of people on the centrist, on progressive issues, they're outspoken, they'll want action, but when it comes to Palestine, they're quiet and they won't really, they want the Palestinians to just remain suppressed and silent without calling for any action. We got a bit of that today as well, actually, in a tweet by the US Secretary of State Blinken, where he said that, you know, our commitment to Palestine is unyielding, something along the, I'm paraphrasing, but basically that's what he said, unyielding. Following the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque, our commitment to Palestine is unyielding. But what is it that you're doing? If you're criminalizing BDS, a peaceful movement, where is your commitment to Palestine? If the threshold of resistance is that you can't even, is this low, you can't even peacefully resist, what are Palestinians meant to do? So you question your commitment to progressive ideals, like JK Rowling mentioned. So it's an issue which I think angers a lot of Palestinians like yourself and others. You know, where is your progressive ideals when it comes to Palestine? You know, what do you want Palestinians to do? I guess that's how you feel. So what do you want us to do? If you criminalize BDS, so we cannot even boycott, you know, Israeli products which are harvested and produced in occupied territories, what are we meant to do?
Yeah, because nothing else is working. I think that's the bottom line. If you truly want peace, you have to help us here, because no other option has helped so far. I think it kind of hits the nail on the head when you see people boycotting kind of Russia, sort of enforcing BDS on Russia in support of Ukrainian people who are now being occupied. But then that, you know, after years of people saying BDS is wrong or it's too complicated, it feels like double standards. And I think it just highlights that kind of Western consciousness of, you know, if they don't look like us, then it's not my problem. And actually it is, you know, it's a global movement. We only achieve things when we come together as a community and we fight together as a community and we look after each other. So it is a really frustrating process, but there have been lots of wins. And I think, you know, if you start to criminalize BDS, to me, that kind of sounds like it's working.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And there will be a backlash as a result of that. Just before we leave, anything new you're working on we should keep our eye on before we leave?
There are things coming, but they are very much in the beginnings. So if you keep link up with me online, and you can see all my things there. And yeah, I'm a friendly face. So if anybody ever wants to collaborate or anything, then please go ahead and send me a message.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amira, for your time. It's been wonderful talking to you. I want to thank our guests who have tuned in. Hope to see you for another memo in conversation. Have a good evening or good morning, wherever you are, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.